Hey, mi gente, it's Julian Steve. You already know my name, but if you're new here, hey! Today we're going to be talking about people's debates on the term Afro-Latino, specifically the Latino community's issue with the term. We're going to focus on Reddit complaints. Of course, we're going to be talking about intersections with outside voices as well, because they do intertwine with certain things that were being posted on Reddit. And we're going to get more into this in this video. Okay, mi gente? Okay, mi gente? Okay! We're going to start now. On Reddit, there is a community called Ask Latin America. In this community, they talk about the Latin American experience, and of course, they focus specifically on Latin Americans, or Latin America, from people in their distinct countries in Latin America. Of course, there are intersections when it comes to Latin Americans from the United States, but it's mostly based on Latin Americans from a Latin American country. Now I am going to read this specific topic related to the topic that we're going to be discussing today. This commenter states, the term Afro-Latino was once used to describe people with African ancestry in Latin America, and now it's used as a broad term to describe dark-skinned Hispanics, mixed-race people, mulattoes, and now even people with around 10% African ancestry are claiming to be Black. Many Black people with Black parents from Latin America resent this term being used so freely and feel invisible. What say you? I think the person meant, what do you say? Or what do you think is a better way to say it? Now, the original commenter sounds genuine when they were asking this question, so I'm not going to say nothing too negative about them. And of course, I have thoughts with their question, but we're going to mainly focus on the additional questions that were answered after this person mentioned this question. The first comment I wanted to talk about, this commenter states, I'm Black and I think these labels are a result of the Gringos' obsession with race. I'm not Afro-Latino, I am just a Black Latin American. Now, when it comes to this comment, when they refer to somebody who's a gringo, they specifically focusing on somebody who is American. They're not talking about somebody who is white. Of course, some people say gringo when they talk about a white person too, but for the most part of the context of this sentence, they're specifically speaking on Americans. What bothers me about this comment is that it's not coming from a place of generosity, because if they were trying to be generous, they would have been straight up and told the truth about how in Latin America there is a lack of Afro-Latino representation. So because of that, a lot of Latin Americans who happen to be Black or mixed race, meaning biracial, meaning half Black. Since I gotta be specific, because certain people do not get the message when I talk about mixed race people on this channel, so I gotta be even more specific. But focus everyone, focus. We feel like we're not treated equally. We feel like we are excluded when it comes to the identity of being a Latino, because usually we're excluded from the conversation. And when it comes to certain Black people who happen to have Latin American roots. They come off as very naive when it comes to the term Afro-Latino just because they never heard of it before, even though this term existed ever since the 1950s, 1940s, 1950s, and of course it became a bit more known in the 1970s, but then it became even more known in the 2010s. So, of course, it's a new term, but it existed. But people want to pretend it never existed before, and even back in Latin American countries, they referred to the Black people in these Latin American countries as Afro when they describe their race. Or they end up being, they call them Negro or mulatto, even though I personally do not like that term because it has a negative connotation. And I know it has a negative history when it comes to mixed race people who have a Black parent. So I didn't want to say it in the video, but come on, it's the person said that, I didn't say that. But when you hear someone who is an Afro-Latino, but they happen to be confused on the term, it's usually because of that. They just do not know what it is, or they feel like it's an attack on their Latin American heritage, but it really is not. It's just a distinction so people can know that you're a Black person who happens to be a Latin American. And then when you think about how certain people be thinking that there are no such thing as Black Latin Americans, it's very disheartening. And then of course, when you see certain people try to take away your Black heritage and then try to exclude you from other Black people, of course you're going to want to end up making a distinction including your race in the conversation. And then when you have anti-Blackness in your family, that's another discussion. But that also plays a factor with why you want to be more specific with your race and your ethnicity tied together. Comment number 2. I'm thinking it's probably incorrect right from the start since many Africans aren't Black. Sounds like yet another euphemism for Black people who in this particular case live in Latin America. I find it so weird for people to need to adopt and invent these labels to segregate themselves. What? Many Africans aren't Black. This is so dumb. Keep in mind, I've seen many takes like this before, so this is not the only one. This is why I'm kind of not surprised, but it's just so dumb how far people can go to fit their own stupid agendas without doing any fucking research. When it comes to this term, people always try to use the example of other ethnicities, and it's very ignorant to use Africa as an example because in Africa, the people who are currently there is because of migration, and they there because of history with their ancestors trying to mess up Africa. We all know what I'm talking about. I'm not gonna get too specific, but if you pay attention in global history class, you know what I'm talking about. But by you mentioning all that these people are still African just because they were born in Africa, but they a different race, it still doesn't mean crap. It still doesn't change the fact that this person is white, this person is Black, this person is Asian, this person is indigenous, and so on. People love to make this excuse that just because certain ethnicities do not identify with their Black heritage first, that means Afro-Latinos shouldn't do it neither. But that doesn't make sense. When it comes to Africa, once again, I know it's a continent, but when it comes to Africa or Africans, they talking about black Africans and people who are African descent. But people are thinking, oh, they meaning that everybody's African. And it's like, when you talk about race, no. But when you talk about ethnicity, yes. I do want to mention another thing. How does this segregate black Latinos from Latinos who are non-black? How does this separate us? Especially with a lot of them trying to segregate us already, because I have so many stories and my family has stories too, and I even have friends who have their own stories growing up with non-black Latinos, trying to exclude them from the conversation of being Latino, or when they told them that they are Latino too, they say no, they not because they black. So miss me with that bullshit. Comment number 3. A term that we don't use. The follow-up comment after this one. Facts, but I'm meeting a lot of Dominican girls calling themselves Afro-Latina, and it's pretty cringy. There's nothing wrong with being mixed, mulatto, but you don't have to claim something you're not just because it's hip. This Boricua I met uptown, blonde hair, blue eyes, pale skin, told me she was Afro-Latina, and I was confused. Now, when it comes to this comment, I get certain things that they were saying. Not the first one, a term that we don't use. That one is bullshit. What I do want to say is, just because people do not use it in conversations all the time does not mean that people do not use it. For example, I identify as Afro-Latino. Do you think I'm going to say I'm Afro-Latino all the time? No. When you watch my videos, I don't mention it all the time. I started to when you get closer to, I guess, 2021, 2022. And that's because there were new people keep coming in. And I didn't want them to get the wrong idea that I'm pretending to be something that I'm not. Because I remember like a while ago when I used to not mention my identity in the videos, people were asking me if I was African American because of certain topics I've discussed on my channel, and I had to make clarifications because of that. That's why I've been more comfortable sharing my identity. And then another thing, whenever I mention that I'm Latino, if I say I'm Latino, people be like, they get a bit puzzled. So when I mention the Afro and the Latino, it makes even more sense for people to get it. So that's just why I do it, especially online. But in real life, I do, but not all the time. The next part, so we gotta break down what this person said. So the follow-up comment. When it comes to Dominican girls identifying as Afro-Latina or Afro-Latino, I kind of get it because Dominicans do not have the best reputation when it comes to identify as black or discriminating Haitians. And because of that, a lot of Dominicans, specifically black Dominicans and mixed race Dominicans, specifically half black Dominicans, have been tried to be more outspoken on their black heritage online and in real life because of this reason. And I understand why they would do that, because they don't have the best rep when it comes to them acknowledging that they're black first. But it's progression. I do see, like I said, a lot of Dominicans that are black or half black identifying with their blackness, and it's really nice to see. And trying to get along with Haitians, that's nice to see. But we cannot pretend that because of that, this is a factor as to why Dominicans who happen to be black or half black are identifying more with their Afro-Latino heritage. I do not appreciate this person trying to diminish them for identifying with their black heritage and trying to call them cringy. How is that fucking cringy? That is who they are. How is that cringy? Like, I be thinking some of you guys be saying things just to say them. Like, you don't think before saying words. However, when it comes to the part about people who are not Afro-Latinos identify as Afro-Latino, I do have an issue with that. But this is where I try to be a bit nice. I do know certain people have identity issues. I'm pretty sure this Boricua had identity issues. I get it. Certain people do identify with being Afro-Latino and they not. And that's because either they have a parent who is mixed race or a grandparent who is the only black person in the family. And like the immediate family, I get that. So I try to empathize a bit, and then I do know certain people who have a situation like that, but they stopped identifying as black or half black because they know that's not their full ancestry, it's not their full background. However, for the people like this woman who are from Uptown, which is vague, but I'm assuming the Bronx, having identity issues even though they clearly white, it's really sad to see. And this is where I'm going to tell you, you as a person who cares so much about Afro-Latino representation and Afro-Latino identity, why don't you call this person out instead of being quiet? Why don't you educate them? Send them videos. Send them articles. Why don't you tell them my story or a bunch of other black people's stories when it comes to being an actual Afro-Latino? I'm pretty sure you didn't thought about that. Exactly. Comment number 4. Redundant. Why can't Afro-Latinos just be Latinos? Now, how is it redundant when the Latino label is exclusive? The amount of times I've been shamed just for being a black Latino in New York City is wild, especially because people be thinking New York City is diverse. New York City is a melting pot. While we are, there is a lot of discrimination here. There is a lot of racism here. There is a lot of things here in this very small city with a bunch of people in it. The amount of people who try to tell me that I am not Latino just because I'm black is ridiculous. I have so many stories. Then my sisters and my parents have their own stories. My cousins, my aunts, my uncles, they have their own stories. My friends have their own stories. We have our stories. And I feel like when people try to pretend that Latinos are inclusive, that is not true. They are not inclusive. There's a club where certain people are able to go in and certain people are kept out. Circling back to my sisters' experience when it comes to being black Latinas is different from my experience. And that's because my sisters and I were not the same complexion, but also my sisters, they especially my older sister, they are very fluent in Spanish. So because of that, they kind of could prove that they are Latina. But here's the thing though, my sisters have their own experiences where certain people were questioning their Latin American heritage just because they're black. Because of me being of a darker complexion, people were more willing to tell me I'm lying about my heritage, making fun of me just because I'm saying that my parents are Honduran and telling me that I'm ashamed of what I am because they would always point out that I'm black, and I'm like, I know I'm black, but my parents are from Honduras. So it's like, why do I have to explain to you my parents' background if I just did? I said my parents are from Honduras. I'm a black person, but my parents are from Honduras. Like, that shouldn't be like something that somebody's going to try to challenge you with, but people did try to challenge me with that a bunch of times, especially when I was younger. And of course, like, things kind of got better when I got older, but there was still tension certain times to this day, even now that I'm 25. I'm like, why? Like, why you want to gatekeep the Latin American heritage? Like, I do not understand. Then I remember there were certain times when people would tell me certain things like, why are you hearing reggaeton? Why are you hearing, Spanish music? Or why are you trying so hard to be Latino? And I'm looking at them like, what? Because, like, you basically telling me that I'm not Latino because I'm black. And I'm like, what? And then it's like, I'm not going to continuously try to explain myself. And then that's why there were times I used to lie about my parents' background, because I would always get annoyed explaining to people why my parents are black but they from Honduras. Like, that always pissed me off when you hearing certain adults saying that there's no such thing as a black person from a Latin American country. That makes you feel isolated as well. And I heard that a bunch of times growing up too, not only just from the kids and the teenagers, but from the adult Latinos. Of course, there were a few black people being ignorant too and saying that there's no such thing as a black person with Latin American heritage. But in that area, I'm gonna give it a bit of a pass. I'm assuming these people were used to seeing people that look a certain way being the only Latinos. But that still doesn't change the fact that that's not okay that you're trying to tell people that they not what they are, even though that's what they are. Comment 5. I don't like the term at all. I'd rather use Black Latin American because a white Tusanean is as African as a Black Congolese. Again, this is Gringos' fault and their obsession with race. Once again, these people want to blame Americans for the obsession of race, even though Latinos are obsessed with race as well. Not even globally, people are obsessed with race. I'm tired of people pretending that it's just an American thing. It's not. Race issues are globally, but people want to pretend it's mainly in the United States. If you do some fucking research, you would know this. But I feel like people do not. Instead, they'd rather just talk up their ass and say more and more misinformation, or they talk to certain black people who fit their bubble and fit their criteria with their views, and this messes them up. So they say redundant things like this. Then this goes back to what I was talking about with generalizing Africa, acting like the white Africans do not have more privileges than the black Africans. I feel like certain people want to pretend that they do not see things. Like, a quick Google search is going to prove everything I'm talking about right now. And then I have friends who are descended from an African continent, or they were born in an African continent. They have their own stories. They have friends from the Caribbean that are black, and they have their own stories, or their families have their own stories. So I just feel like this is very disingenuous, and it's disrespecting Black people. Comment 6. Bonus. Gringos is what I think. Gringos trying to save the real Latin American culture. So this person just called Black Latinos brutes. So you're saying our Black Latin American cultures are animals. I'm telling you, when I say there are racist people in Latin America, I mean it. Because this is an exhibit of what I'm talking about. And then this kind of doesn't surprise me. It really does not surprise me. It tells you that these people think our Black cultures are animals. Yet these are the same people who do our customs half of the time. And as a matter of fact, most Latin American cultures come from African cultures in Latin America. Yes, most of our customs come from Africa. However, when you're with a bunch of Black people from Latin America or descendants from Latin America, that's a special type of culture because we are the originators. This is why I get kind of upset when I see Black people hating their Black heritage, because look at how so many people dislike us or dislike our contributions to our cultures. Then I see us hating ourselves, hating our Blackness, hating our African customs and stuff like that. It's really sad to see, and I really hope more Black people wake up and start to enjoy and embrace their African roots, whatever part of the diaspora you're from, and stop worshiping whiteness, stop worshiping other parts of other communities, and stop trying to seek for other communities just because you have a traumatic experience with your Black identity. We all do in some shape or form, but you cannot deny the fact that there are people who are envious of you just because you're Black, just because you're African. Afro-Latinos deserve better, especially with how we want to identify our African ancestry. Remember, there are different types of Afro-Latinos. We're not all the same. So by identifying as one thing to talk about us as a collective, it's easier for researchers to put that information. And I'm going to use a perfect example. You researched about something related to Afro-Latinos, I believe, in 2020, and they found out that there are 6 million Afro-Latinos in the United States. However, 5.2 million Afro-Latinos identify as Afro-Latino, or specifically Black Latino or Latin American or Latino or Hispanic, whereas about 800,000 Afro-Latinos, they do not identify with being Latino or Hispanic. And I'm pretty sure it has to do with certain things I've talked about in this video, which I totally understand. But I do feel like we as a collective have to find ways to go back to our Latin American roots that happen to have African influences, because that's our ancestry. We shouldn't feel like we have to take away our heritage just because of what people from Latin America tell us, or people in the United States, or whatever part of the world you're a part of. You cannot deny your heritage. You cannot stop acknowledging what you are. Pew Research states, the multiple dimensions of Latino identity reflect the non-colonial history of Latin America, during which mixing occurred among indigenous Americans, white Europeans, Asians, and enslaved people from Africa. In Latin America's colonial period, about 15 times as many African slaves were taken to Spanish and Portuguese colonies than to the US. About 130 million people of African descent live in Latin America, and they make up roughly a quarter of the region's total population, according to recent estimates from the Project on Ethnicity and Race in Latin America, BERLA, at Princeton University. After reading this, you can see there are a bunch of Afro-Latinos in Latin America. This does not include the United States, Canada, nor other parts of the world. So we probably a bit bigger than this amount, of course, because it shows that this is specifically in Latin America, which I appreciate these statistics because we need to know these things, and people who do not know definitely need to know about these things. So I appreciate it. I just wish that more people do the research and see that we're not a small amount, we're bigger than what people actually think we are. But of course, when there are louder voices trying to tell us to be quiet and tell us how we should identify as, it makes us feel like we are obligated to be, I guess, loyal to being a Latin American person or being Latino or being Hispanic. But what happens if we want to be more closer to our Black, aka African roots? What happens if we want people that look like us from other parts of the diaspora to see that we acknowledge our Blackness and that we want to make sure our Black ancestry doesn't go extinct in Latin American culture? What happens if we want to exclusively partner with Black people? What happens? These people do not think about that. And what I mean by these people, I'm talking about Latinos who are not Black and want to support the idea of white supremacy. Not all, but I noticed that these type of people, like on these Reddit threads and on YouTube comments or Instagram comments, because I've seen it before, they have a distinct agenda and it's not going to work. You're not going to stop me nor other Black people trying to connect with one another. It's not going to happen. You're going to have to do more than that to stop us from being connected. Thank you so much if you made this far in this video. I appreciate you. Be sure to like this video, comment your thoughts, especially if you're from the diaspora, the African diaspora. Of course, I want to hear from other Latinos and people who are curious about this topic, even though they're not Latino, Latina, Latin, etc. You get the point. But I really want to hear from the diaspora, the African diaspora. Anyone's welcome as long as you're not a bigot. And if you are a bigot, I'm going to block you. Or if you're a coon, I'm going to block you too. Okay, mi gente? Okay, mi gente? Okay. Thank you and peace, mi gente.